We are well and truly into the second half of the NFL season, and things are hotting up for fantasy as we jostle for our playoff places. We're going to have a look at some starts and sits as usual, but Ed, only a couple of buys this week. How are they going to impact our rosters, do you think, this week?
Yeah, just the two buys. The Colts, the surprise package of this season, without a doubt. So you'll be seeing Danny Dimes, JT, someone else gets a chance at Fantasy Heroes this week. The fancy beast that he is. Tyler Warren has been very fruitful, as has Michael Pittman, despite a down week last week. Even Alec Pierce is a popular flex play. Saints, you won't need to be disappointed by Kamara this week, but you are without Olave and you are without Juwan Johnson. And just to mention, Tyler Shook was QB 12 last week, so it'll be interesting to see how he comes out the other side of the bye.
Let's have a look at some starts of the week then. And I'm going to go to something I always do, but I don't like to, especially this week. And I'm looking at who the Bengals have got. They come back off their bye week. I'm not expecting, Ed, I don't know if you are, but we always say the Ravens come out of the bye and seem to remember how to defend.
Yes.
Do you think that the Bengals defense have remembered how to move faster than a jog and tackle?
There's been absolutely no sign of that whatsoever. They will be, I'm sure, just as terrible as they were pre-bye.
So that does make Aaron Rodgers a start candidate at QB for this week. The Bengals are given the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, 21.3. So we doubt that the Bengals defense are going to be raring to go. Rodgers hasn't been solid fantasy QB by any stretch, but this year, top 10 feels as nailed on as it can be. Jordan Love versus the Giants. So they're given the fourth most points. I'm very, very excited before we start recording, seeing that James Winston is due to start for the Giants this week. Spoiler alert, he is absolutely going to be in my DFS lineups all over the place this week. 26.48 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 games of the Giants have been giving up. Love has been up and down this season, but it looks like this is a week where he should get 20 plus fantasy points. That feels on the cards. Next up, Tyler Lockett. I didn't think I'd ever mention him in a positive way in a fantasy context again, but he has the Cowboys this week, who we know love to give up some passing yards, and 40.50 points per game to fantasy wide receivers, second most in the league. This could be Trey Tucker too, let's be fair, but I wanted to mention Tyler Lockett because I haven't had the chance to do so for so long. 6 targets.
Is he a bust, Tyler Lockett? Are we having him down as a bust this year? Or will we not? I vividly remember us discussing him in the preseason shows when we did the deep dives, and we speculated, his role and whether he'd get the targets. But he's just done nothing, has he?
I suppose he feels like a bust because he's constantly surprised us positively the last few years. We just thought time would never catch up with him. But it seems to have done now. I think, like we say about it's the targets, though, isn't it? And last week, 6 targets meant that he was in the mix of being fantasy relevant. And the fact he's got the Cowboys defense, I just feel this could be his final ever fantasy relevant. We're talking flex. None of these we're expecting to be top at their position. There's no point in discussing those players at starts of the week. If you're in a bit of a tight spot with injuries, maybe play with some bye, he could be a flex-worthy play this week. It's the matchup that appeals. Malik Washington versus the Commanders. So they are given the third most fantasy points per game to fantasy wide receivers, 38.88. Waddle's obviously locked in. We're playing Jalen Waddle. No, obviously nothing around that. But it's Washington's uptick in production that's been interesting, and especially again against that Commanders defense. Higher ceiling of Phil than Lockett, 100%, but potentially quite a nice flex play this week. Noah Fant, let's talk about a Bengals tight end rather than the tight ends that are facing the Bengals. So the Steelers giving up 16.94 fantasy points per game, the 5th most to fantasy tight ends. Before the bye, Fant's targets were interesting. He's been one of Joe Flacco's preferred targets. And is he going to be a lights out tight end who's going to get you 20 points? No, he's not going to have that sort of week in him. But 12-ish, 14 points, tight end, 10. It feels possible when you've not got an elite tight end. You're matchup watching, aren't you?
Yeah, I can't decide. As a Bengals fan, I can't decide whether I'm disappointed in Noah Fant or not. I was quite excited. I thought he was quite a canny pickup to go alongside Gesicki. He's a great pass catching tight end, a real threat. I suppose you have to take into account that he's not had Burrow, but he's had Flacco over the last few games, who's been more than solid. I agree. I think he should be a threat from a fantasy perspective this week. But it does feel like with Gesicki out, he should be even more involved.
And finally, let's talk about Woody Marks. So his workload continues to grow and grow and grow. I think there was a point where he left the game in week 10 and we wonder whether Nick Chubb would get the run, but he was back out there, continued to show that production. And this week, he has the Titans, who are given the 5th most fantasy points per game at 2 fantasy running backs, 25.98. Woody Marks, I think we've probably been up and down on whether we feel confident. This week, I think, is one where you can absolutely lock him in and feel as content as possible in that position. Before we move on to our sits of the week, please do take a moment to subscribe, like, to give us a share for your start sits, your hero zeros, DFS and streaming options each and every week through the fantasy season. Ed, I'm going to start with a player that we've mentioned a lot this year, and I think we tend to get it wrong when we call what he's going to do, but Trevor Lawrence this week is against the Chargers, who are giving up 10.84 points per game to quarterbacks, the 3rd fewest in the league. Trevor Lawrence is still 24% started at the minute at the time of recording. That has got to drop because the Chargers are consistent against fantasy quarterbacks. Trevor Lawrence is not a consistent fantasy quarterback. That's only going to work out one way when it comes to that. I think that's going to be a quiet week for T-Law. Right, next. Last time I went for one of the biggest of the big names was Derrick Henry, and you said that maybe I was being a bit too harsh, and you went on to have a stinker. There is a time to call your, well, not call your shot, whatever not calling your shot is like, unload. I don't know. I'm going down a metaphor rabbit hole. There's a time to pull. I'm going to shut. There's a time to pull your big guns out of battle. I'm going to go for that way instead. I wanted something to do with firing. Mahomes against the Broncos this week, they are given the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, 12.60. Yes, he has been locked in for most of the season. A rare slip up against the Giants in week 3 with only 11.16 points, but his only real tough matchup was against Buffalo in week 9, who are currently the only team he has faced who are in the top 10 when it comes to the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and he scored 11.5 points against them. I know that on the face of it, you play your big guns, but this is one that I don't feel he is going to be matchup proof in. Is this me wishful thinking, giving the Broncos too much credit, or am I making perfect sense, Ed?
I don't think there are going to be many people who will leave Patrick Mahomes on their bench this season. Maybe the last couple of seasons, but he has been fairly relentless this season. And the caveat I'd add in as well is that he loves the divisional matchup, doesn't it? He seems to have a hex over the Broncos and the Raiders. Maybe not the Chargers as much, but yeah, I wouldn't be benching Patrick Mahomes, but like you say, if there is going to be a week when he has a down week, this is the week. And if you've got someone who's got a better matchup, maybe think about it. But yeah, you'd be a braver man than me to leave him on your bench.
Let's rewind 2 weeks. If I had said that of the Bills matchup, who were giving it the 4th fewest, so giving it more points than the Broncos, and we'd had that same thing, but he always performs in the big games and he loves playing the Bills, would you have said the same thing?
Yeah, it's a fair point.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's one I like it when we disagree because it means we can discuss me being stupid or my triumph next week. Either way, we'll revisit it, I am sure. Next up, then, having a look at Walker and Charbonnet, the Seattle running back duo against the Rams. We're going at 16.23 fantasy points per game to running backs. That is the fewest in the league. That is not per running back. Obviously, that is running back committees combined in those games. They're running back 27 and 34, respectively, at the minute. I think if you're top 20 in this sort of situation, I think for a running back, you could maybe risk it because you could get flex value still. I just see both getting maybe 7 to 8 points this week. I think I forget what it was, it's like 94 attempts so far this season for Charbonnet, 120 for Walker. They're splitting work. They're splitting who is the most productive each week. This is a week I'd rather not make that decision personally. We're then going back to the Broncos-Chiefs matchup. And when we're looking at the Chiefs on defense, so they're giving up 26.61 fantasy points game to wide receivers, sixth fewest, but over the last 4 weeks, only 19.57. That's the fewest over the last 4 weeks to wide receivers. This is the same with Troy Franklin, to be honest. I'm just putting Cortland Sutton because he's the highest projected scoreline in this game so far. They've been tough to pass on. Over the last 5 games, only 3 teams have gone over 200 passing yards against them. That was the Jags with 210 and the Bills with 268. So I think it's probably going to have a low scoring affair. I don't look what the over-under is, but I think I'd be taking the under in this Chiefs-Broncos game this week. Talk about some tight ends. It's always sticky when you've got a tight end committee. Oh, a lovely little rhyme. I'm going to keep that. But Njoku and Fannin, 25% and 21% roster currently. They've got the Ravens, who have remembered how to defend post-bye. Over the last 4 games, Titans have averaged only 2.5 receptions and 24 yards, against the newly awakened Ravens defense. The job share limits them both, and for this week, they are both out of fancy favour for me, despite us both being happy to take a gamble on one or the other at various points over the season.
Yeah, Fanning's somebody who I was enjoying slotting into DFS lineups actually, and over the last couple of weeks that's burned me a little bit. And you're right that you can't look at the season-long stats with the Ravens now because they've done their what now appears traditional half-season wake-up, and they're a different proposition to what they were earlier in the season. So I agree. I wouldn't start either of those this week.
Finally, Cade Otton. He's got the Bills. We know the Bills are excellent against tight ends, 6.16 fantasy points per game. Otton had the volume in recent weeks, 12 targets last week, which is definitely a trend that I think people will probably follow this week. But Buffalo are giving up only 2.4 targets and 26 yards per game to tight ends and only 1 touchdown all season. So if you have acquired Otton, I know he's much more highly rostered recent weeks after that production uptick. I don't think I'd be chancing it this week. A game where there are going to be plenty of possible fancy assets, though, is your game of the weekend as we go to SoFi Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, well, you can see the picture there is actually from almost a year to the day when the Rams won 26-20 in overtime. And if you remember, it was the game where Nakua was ejected early from the game. I don't know. In my head, Nakua is like a nice, mild-mannered young man. But quite surprising. Incredibly spicy NFC West matchup. We've got the 7-2 Seahawks taking on the 7-2 Rams. Both looking good for the playoffs, but they'll be desperate to win their division. Both also come off the back of impressive Week 10 wins. The Seahawks absolutely demolished the Cardinals in the first half, especially from a defensive point of view. They looked on course for like 3 figures, but they opted for pipe and slippers in the second half. And the Rams brushed aside the 49ers in another divisional matchup to set up this really spicy encounter. Let's start off with players you've got locked in. From the Rams' perspective, quite a few players. Stafford having an excellent fantasy season, QB7. 5 of his last 6 starts have been QB1 weeks. Puka, wide receiver 4. He's been relentless. Bearing in mind that he limped out of that game against the Ravens and then missed the following week before the bye. Every other week, he's been amazing. Devontae Adams, likewise, one of the huge, not surprises, but someone maybe we weren't expecting to be as good as he has been. He's wide receiver 7, way outpacing his ADP, looking like one of the steals of the season. There were some question marks over Kyren Williams before the season started, especially in Team Hanson headquarters. But he's been very reliable. He's RB9, comes off the back of that 2-touchdown performance in Week 10, and he's another player to lock in. Seahawks. Now, when it comes to fantasy in this matchup, there aren't many Seahawks players who are nailed on starters, but there's definitely one. Jackson Smith-Njigba, current wide receiver 1. He's been a wide receiver 1 every single week, bar 1. Heavily targeted. You're almost guaranteed 8 receptions and 100 yards and maybe a touchdown. Obviously he'll be in your lineup. Moving into kind of must should pay off. Now, with the Rams, I don't think there's anybody in this category. I think with the Rams, it's boom or bust. And there's no one. I'll come on to the busts in a minute. Seahawks, on the other hand, goodness me, there are loads of Seahawks who fall into this category. You mentioned how good the Rams are against running backs, the best in the NFL in terms of fantasy points per game. So I wouldn't be starting Charbonnet or Walker. I think Walker's been a disappointment. He hasn't been fantasy relevant since week 4. Charbonnet's shown a bit more life of late, and he is a red zone threat. So if I had to plug one in, he'd be the one I opted for. Mark's mate, Sam Darnold, solid fantasy season, but he's coming up against a Rams defense who are averaging just over 15 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, the 8th best in the league. So I expect a down week for Darnold. I think this is going to be, a good week for the defenses in this game. I mean, last week, the Seahawks scored 44 points and Darnold ended up with 5.92 fantasy points. I mean, that doesn't happen very often, does it?
No, that was even though I love weighing on Sam Darnold, even I was surprised to see that.
Indeed. I mean, I think there was two touchdowns from the defense from memory. I expect one other Seahawks receiver to have a solid game. Will it be Kupp? Will it be Rashid Shaheed? No idea. I mean, Shaheed's the explosive one, and Kupp's been underwhelming, so I'd probably plug in Shaheed if pushed. And also in this category, I'd go for AJ Barner. Currently tight end 19. He's shown potential, most notably when he was tight end 1 in week 5. And there have been a few other double-figure scores. And I'd expect him to be back to a more significant pass-catching role after he suffered, along with the rest of the offense, bar Smith and Jigba, last week. Best of luck if you are starting any other Rams player. They're a huge risk. I'm not sure you'd plug any into a lineup with confidence. Blake Corum, only broken for 10 fantasy points once. Tyler Higbee, very hit and miss. He's only exceeded 3 receptions on 2 occasions, and he seems to be reliant on a touchdown to get a double-figure score. The only caveat I would add is that the Seahawks are giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, 17.29. So maybe worth plugging in. And the Seahawks, anyone else again. Torrey Horton would be a bold play if he's fit. He was wide receiver 8 in week 9 before he was injured last week. But you'd expect Shaheed, recently acquired, to eat into Horton's targets. And also you've got rookie tight end Elijah Arroyo. He'll get some targets, but I just don't think he'll be fantasy relevant in this game.
No, it's interesting to say about Seahawks tight ends and that, because I think that's probably where we may well kind of visit there when it comes to DFS tight ends, maybe, where you kind of looking to risk at a lower price. But you're right. It's the fact that it was Allen that was the highest scoring tight end last week does mean it's a risky field to confidently plug in for your main fancy lineups, isn't it?
Definitely.
Ed, Tom filled your boots last week very successfully. So let's take a look at the week 11
Fantasy Thoughts. Preston versus Ed.
So it is now 6-3. Tom got an extra victory in Fred. He's now provided 50% of your wins, Ed. That's how generous he was. In your absence last week, we went for a simple who scores more. We picked 3 matchup where the projected scorelines were reasonably close, and I asked Tom to pick who would get the highest scores with the QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defensive score. And it was very, very close. Not in the first game. The Texans absolutely destroyed the Jaguars. It was 84-45 points. 49ers were... so Tom selected the Rams, but 49ers came out on top. So I got a point there. Tom got 1 wrong. Only 2 points separated them there. And then the Buccaneers romped home 74-65 points, 6 points over the Patriots when it came to fantasy scores. So Tom won 2-1, and Tom got you a point.
Thank you, Tom.
Very generous of him. This week we have the AFC North QB special. What does that involve, Ed? What am I selecting?
Yeah, so it is both matchups in the AFC North this week. We've got the Bengals at the Steelers and the Ravens at the Browns. So I thought, it's interesting to look at the QBs in that division. So basically, we're going to go with a higher or lower on their season average. So with each quarterback, do you think they are going to beat their season average score? So let's start off with Lamar. As I say, the Ravens are at the Browns. Now, Lamar's missed a few games this season. He had came back off his injury, had a great game against Miami. He was quite against the Vikings last week as the defense stepped up and made some big plays. But he's currently averaging 22.8 fantasy points. So will he beat that score? Will he go higher or lower against that tough Browns defense?
I do. I think this will be lower this week. I don't. The Browns, as much as I hate to say, the Browns are good. I think it looks like what we're seeing with Lamar and Derrick Henry. There's a little bit of let's get through this easier schedule of games at the minute intact. So yeah, I think we'll perhaps see a less aggressive running game from Lamar, which I think will probably lessen his output. So I'm going to go lower for Lamar.
Okay, moving on to Joe Flacco. Now we've spoke at length about the Bengals defense, but in contrast, the Bengals offense has been, I think the word is balling over the last few weeks before the bye. Coming up against a tough-ish Steelers defense, certainly not as I'd say as fearsome as they have been in previous years. Now with Flacco's average, I hope you'll be happy with this. I'm only using his Bengals performance because
that makes it a lot easier.
I think if we include his Browns one, it messes with the average. So his Bengals average is a quite impressive 25.44. And he, of course, had that mammoth score against Chicago where he was QB2 before the bye, and the defense somehow managed to mess it up. So last time against the Steelers, he scored 25.98. And as I say, his average is 25.44. So does he go higher or lower this time against the Steelers?
I think I'm going to go lower. So I'm just looking at the moment. Steelers are giving up on average 19.74. I think the one reason I'm going lower is because he's been so good. I think that does inflate his overall score. I don't see that being sustainable. But yeah, I'm going to go lower for Joe Flacco.
Okay, so in the same matchup, we have Aaron Rodgers, who takes on that pathetic Bengals defense. In week 7,
when do you want me to say higher? Do you want to keep explaining before I say higher?
Well, I'll tell you.
Higher. Okay, just in case I waver.
He scored against the terrible Bengals offense in week 7, 24.56. That isn't his highest score of the season. That was week 1 against the Jets. But his average is 15.9. So are you going to go higher or lower?
Higher.
Higher. Okay.
Higher.
And last one, Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback for the Browns. Now, he is, obviously new to the role. He's kind of only been the starting quarterback for the last few weeks. Very good week against the Jets last week with just over 20 fantasy points. But his average is 12.88. So, of course, against the newly invigorated Ravens defense, does he beat that 12.88? Yes or no?
That's really tricky because I think I'd feel happy going around 12, 13. I think so. This would be the one, if you had to pick which one was closest to the average, this would be the one I'd go for. I think he's gonna go. I think he's getting a bit more running, so I think that might just tip him over. I think I can see him getting 13-ish points, so I'm gonna go higher for Gabriel.
So to summarize, you're going Lamar lower, Flacco lower, Rodgers higher, Gabriel higher, and the tiebreak, should we need it?
Yep.
Which of those 4 quarterbacks will score the highest? If you get it right, you win the tiebreak. If you get it wrong, I win the tiebreak.
Oh. Right, head is absolutely Aaron Rodgers, heart is Lamar Jackson. It's been a while since I've been able to say it after the way the season, so I'm going for Lamar Jackson, baby!
Okay, so if needed, then so if it's 2-2, then you will go for Lamar as the highest scoring. Wonderful.
Yeah, I've got to. Right, final thing then, we're going to have a look at Sunday Night Bet Club, and there's been a lot of talk about this topic this week, both on different NFL-related shows and also on social media. So we're going to have a look at the current MVP odds, so make our MVP selection. I've put the top 4 when it comes to favourites currently, according to the betting app of choice. Matt Stafford has just edged ahead. You said about 3 or 4 weeks ago, will Drake May enter the MVP conversation? Not only has he entered it, he is he's the second favourite. He is one of the favourites from a way. I don't think it was a hot take when you say it, but it wasn't the trendy pick at that point. I think a lot of the talk was around Dak when you mentioned Drake May initially. It's come to fruition. Jonathan Taylor is up there as third favourite. Why won't he win it regardless of the odds, Ed?
Because he's not a quarterback.
Excellent. Let's move on. Patrick Mahomes at 5. Once again, I think Patrick Mahomes, yes, is having a really good season. He is not currently for me at Stafford May. So I do think realistically we're talking Stafford May. But once again, realistically, last season it was nailed on Lamar Jackson's going to be MVP for the third time. And then Josh Allen just kept putting together. Well, this was the point. He then put about 2 or 3 40-point fantasy games, but was just relentlessly brilliant.
When does the vote happen? Is it at the end of regular season?
Yes. Yeah,
right.
it's that window, isn't it, between regular season and the Super Bowl? I just think there is a chance still for any player to go on a run and turn things around. And that's what some of the odds seems like. I mean, the next up is one that you asked me when I got these odds. I'm assuming you thought I maybe got these odds from last year. Yeah. Because bizarrely, currently on the betting app of choice, 5th favourite and equal with Josh Allen is Joe Burrow.
The only reason I can see that potentially is people are betting on him. You know, he's coming back potentially in a couple of weeks, and somehow if he took the Bengals to the playoffs by some sort of miracle, that might. But it still seems like 7.0 odds.
It's odd.
They're pretty harsh. You know, it's a blooming long shot for him to be MVP.
It does feel like, I don't really get it. Considering Lamar Jackson is odds of 25. No, Lamar Jackson isn't in the mix either, but I would be happier backing Lamar Jackson coming back into form and being fit and actually able to play a game. I'd put him above Joe Burrow on the basis he is currently playing football.
Yeah, exactly.
Sam Darnold, 10.0. Once again, none of these players currently we think are going to win it. That's why their odds are much lower. But Sam Darnold at 10.0 is nice. Justin Herbert, 25, I think is nice odds as well. Do I think he's going to win it? No. But at the odds, if you wanted to take a punt on a couple of those, and maybe they come through the next few games, all guns blazing, it looks interesting. But we know we're going to be looking at the top 4. We're probably not veering out the top 2. Who are you going to make as your selection at this stage? Who do you think is the most probable?
I mean, it's you need to get inside the minds of the people who are voting, I suppose, and I think that who's the most valuable to their team, and I suppose Stafford and May definitely are. And as I said a few weeks ago, I'm a big fan of May. I think Mahomes, if he gets them in the playoffs, which I think is the question mark slightly at the moment, the Chiefs, they're currently not in the playoffs, but I think they will do. I think he's a bit of, he's the darling of the NFL, isn't he? So I would not be surprised to see Mahomes getting it because he's not, he's not got, many MVPs, has he, for such a phenomenal player? He's got a lot of rings. So I think maybe they'll think, well, this is his year to get one after, Lamar's had a couple and Josh Allen's had one.
I think that's the reason why I think Matt Stafford looks.
Yeah, maybe for his longevity.
That narrative seems to hit. I mean, we say this every single year. If you take it down to its most literal term, who is the most valuable player to their team? It's Jonathan Taylor. There is no conversation.
Yes.
He is absolutely the heartbeat, the engine. Any metaphor you can give about how important his team is, it is Jonathan Taylor. But he's a running back, so he's not going to get it. So I think it seems lazy going for the absolute favorite on odds. But I see Matt Stafford. I just think if Drake May sustains this, absolutely. But that would be it's a huge ask of a year 2 quarterback to keep going the way he's going. Is there any reason to doubt it? No. I think I'd back Stafford. And we've seen Mahomes come out to the end of the season absolutely phenomenally before, haven't we? So it's in the mix as well. So get involved in the comments below. Who do you think is going to win it? Why are we wrong? Why is this the first year in ages that a running back will win the award? let us know. Sound off in the comments. But Ed, that is all from us for Week 11 previews. We're going to be back on Friday with our streaming options, and then the DFS show on Saturday, where I will 100% talk for about 5 minutes about James Winston and why this is going to be an exciting weekend to watch the Giants. Anything you want to add, though?
It's good to be back.
It is. It's lovely to have you back. Tom was rubbish. Hi, Tom. That's all from us, though. Tom, come and have a pop at us in the comments as well, or send us an annoyed WhatsApp message. But that is all from us. All that remains is to say bada bing, bada bye, and Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.